I know it's an early morning and maybe everyone was out a bit late last night, so thanks for joining us again. I think a conversation on deposits is a great kind of side to your breakfast, so hopefully we can provide a nice conversation for everybody. Just to introduce myself quickly, my name is Michael Wasserman. I'm a consultant at Eunomia Research and Consulting. I'm joined here with Eric Winter, Senior Manager, Product Marketing at Clynk, and Sarah Axelrod, Director of Sustainability, Beverage Packaging, North and Central America at Ball Corporation. So this morning we're going to be talking a bit about deposits. We've heard a lot about deposits in previous sessions. We've seen some maps where deposit states are located. We know that they can be a very strong policy tool for improving recycling rates. So I think we can provide a great conversation on how we can use technology and convenience to improve, convenience and recycling for everybody in these deposit states. So yeah, just to start, I can provide Eric and Sarah a bit of opportunity to introduce themselves.
Hello. Hi. I'm Eric Winter, and I work for Clynk. Clynk is a recycling technology company. We pioneered bag drop recycling in the United States and operate a program in Maine and New York, where we process several hundred million containers a year. We also have developed a licensable platform to run bag drop programs in other areas.
Hi everybody, Sarah Axelrod. I lead sustainability for Ball Corporation in North America. For those of you who don't know, Ball is the largest aluminum beverage packaging manufacturer in the world. So cans, cups, bottles, we make them for some of the biggest beverage companies in the world. So really exciting. We obviously have a vested interest in circularity and getting that material back. So I spend a lot of time talking about recycling. Thanks for having me.
Thank you both again. And just to get started, as both of you know, and many in our audience know, a lot of these deposits started in the 1970s and the 1980s when legislation passed, but the legislation themselves hasn't changed much in the last 40 years. So can you provide just your perspective both on the collection side and the producer side, how things have needed to change from your sides to help improve recycling rates when policy hasn't changed that much? Sarah?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is policy has to change, right? We at Ball spend a lot of time advocating for this type of legislation, both at the state and at the federal level. So first and foremost, right, policy, at least in our opinion, is the biggest lever in order to drive that change. And we see it all over the world, right? We see systems that have recycling rates that are way better in the US. As my European colleagues tell me all the time, they do this better over there. They're not wrong, right? So they have the policies that support the collection, but at the same time, they also have the infrastructure to support that additional added feedstock. And so thinking about, when we look at the US, those are sort of the two paths that we look at: increased policy and then increased investment in infrastructure.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that there's a challenge in the US with 10 different bottle bills, each functioning completely differently. There are no large players that are going across all of those bottle bills very effectively, sort of soup to nuts. If we had more harmonization of bottle bills, we would have more innovation, we'd have more competition, it would yield to greater efficiencies and higher recycling rates.
Great. And Sarah, you mentioned a bit on this infrastructure need. So what additional needs are there in terms of growing a national infrastructure to kind of get ready for policy so infrastructure can be there when policy is implemented, it can start effectively?
So I'm going to actually reference the Eunomia report that we worked on with you guys, which, the big takeaway from that report, and, this is not revolutionary, but collection and recycling are not synonymous. We spend so much time and so much effort collecting this material that then doesn't always get recycled due to loss rates and processing loss and all of these things, right? And so as we start to think about the infrastructure needs at the local level to counteract some of that, I think that's where we need to see more and more investment. And we've seen a bit of that, right? In the infrastructure bill, there was, of course, money set aside to improve recycling infrastructure. And, to your point about harmonization, I feel like every MRF I talk to has a different setup and you kind of never know how much you're going to get and who's doing what and who has the money to do what. So some harmonization across that system to be more consistent, I think would be fantastic.
Great, yeah, and I was going to ask Eric about this harmonization, if you can expand. You mentioned that. From Clynk's perspective, I mean, how does this help Clynk, and how does that improve recycling rates? And from your perspective, what needs to happen in terms of harmonization?
Well, I think for us, since we license our platform, we're looking for operators that could span larger geographies and could cover more of the volume of containers. So if there were harmonization across the states, we would be able to work with a smaller number of operating partners that could then cover more of the material that's out there.
Okay, great. Just switching gears a bit, I mean, I think many of us want to be as sustainable and environmentally friendly in our own lives as much as possible, but there's always a trade-off between money or time. So how can convenience, help consumers more easily recycle, and what does that really look like in practice?
Yeah, that's right up our alley. I mean, that's what Backdrop is all about, really, is to make it as convenient as possible for the consumer. There's lots of different factors in that. Time is a huge one. So if you can take something that takes 10 or 15 minutes and is unpleasant and maybe unsafe, and you can make it take 5 seconds, that's going to drive a lot more recycling behavior. At the end of the day, recycling rates are driven by consumers choosing to recycle, and you have to have the costs be less than the benefits. And the costs include time, energy, drive times, all of that. And what we see is a lot of convenience is defined by drive times only, and there's also a function of transactional convenience, that at the point of the transaction, you want it to be fast, reliable. And then there's a downstream effect. If you have a customer account, you can communicate with that customer and talk to them about the impacts that they're having. That improves the customer experience by increasing the benefits that they receive.
Sorry.
I would agree with all of that. I was thinking my in-laws live in rural Massachusetts, right on the Vermont border. And whenever we go, and God love them, right, they are aging hippies. So they recycle, and they care about recycling. And every single Tuesday, we spend 45 minutes going through their recycling bin and sorting it out and driving it to the depot, right? We do all of this when we go see them. And it is not convenient. And they are in their late 70s, so they have the time. If I lived in rural Massachusetts, as a recycling person who talks about this all day, every day, I also have a 1-year-old, right? Convenience is a huge factor here. And, I think there's the extent in which we can make it easy and intuitive. I mean, I think that's the thing that I love about working in this role and talking about recycling is once you kind of remind people the benefits, people know how to do it, right? It does feel intuitive. It feels accessible. The more steps you add on to that, the less likely it is that it actually happens. So I think for us, we spend a lot of time talking about how to simplify the system.
Great, and I think something that was mentioned yesterday a bit too is how diverse the United States is. We have very urban areas. New York City obviously looks a lot different than many rural states as well. So how does creating this convenience and flexibility within systems need to be created to support these different geographies within the United States? Maybe we can start with Sarah.
I think it's a really big question. And again, that opportunity and access is, I think we're seeing a lot of, if policy, let me say it a different way, if policy doesn't move maybe as quickly as some of us in the room would want, I think we're seeing a lot of more disruptive models pop up, thinking about rural access. And, and I think there is a huge opportunity for systems like that to scale if we need them to.
Yeah, I think it's also a mix of different modalities. There's no one size fits all. You need to have different programs for different contexts. So urban solutions may be different than the rural solutions. So it's important that we have policy that supports a wide variety of different modalities for recycling.
Okay, great. And the topic of this conversation was technology and consumer convenience. So maybe if we can touch a bit on this technology, and we know that technology has really changed our lives in the last 20 years, whether it's smartphones or smart devices. So what role do you think technology plays in the future of deposit return systems, and how can technology help improve consumer convenience? Maybe start with Eric on this one.
Yeah, I think we're just at the beginning with the technology. There's all kinds of opportunities for improving the technology used in redemption systems and recycling generally. Again, I go back to the customer accounts piece. That's an area with customer-facing touch points, with apps and website to drive home the value of the recycling activity that's being done. But there's all kinds of technology through the entire customer experience that can be applied, whether it's new scanning technologies, AI on the back end. Digimark is really interesting. You know, there's a ton of things that are coming down the pike that will continue to make recycling easier and easier for folks, but we have to embrace it and support innovation, competition, to bring that technology to bear on the challenge of getting more people to engage.
I totally agree on the consumer side. You know, we just announced a pilot program that we're doing with Replenish in the state of Florida, targeting 6 million pounds of aluminum. And the goal of this program is to bring access to people who don't have recycling access. And so what they do is, right, they set up host sites to collect this material. And their sort of secret sauce is they have this app that helps them track this material, and it makes it feel very accessible to the individual, right? The individual downloads this app, they, you know, reap the benefit and the social impact benefit from the material sale. And so I think that on the consumer side has been a really interesting, you know, look at how technology can make it more convenient and, you know, essentially privatize that deposit. So I think that's interesting. But then as we look at how this, you know, and not speaking for our customers, but a conversation we have a lot is how to make this more of a closed loop. So when we think about how that material moves through the system, and how it eventually ends up back to us and then back on a shelf, you know, customers are more and more interested in those material flows. And so the technology on that side of the equation, after it's been collected, after it's been processed, I think is going to help us better understand and better tell that circularity story to ensure even more, not just capture of the material, but, you know, a look at the more holistic system.
I think that's a great point. It ties into transparency generally. The more information you can feed back to the recyclers about the impacts that they're having, the better results you're going to get, because that's why people are recycling. That's a big piece of it. Within a bottle bill context, it may be financial also, but a huge factor is them wanting to see it get recycled. And the more we can play back to them all of the details of what's happening with that material, the stronger engagement you'll get.
Great. Yeah, and Sarah, I think one thing you mentioned is improving access for maybe communities that didn't have access to recycling before. And I think one thing that maybe sometimes gets missed in a lot of technology conversations is this improvement sometimes can create barriers to recycling if you don't have access to that technology. So what are different steps that are being taken to ensure social inclusion within the recycling system?
It's a really good question. It's an important issue. I think it's about designing the programs appropriately for each context. There are ways to design programs that don't require phone or internet access if you put kiosks out in the field. There are a lot of answers for it, but it's really on a program by program basis.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, we are, for those of you who don't know, we have a partnership and a relationship with Cronky Sports and Entertainment. So Ball Arena, SoFi Stadium, and then Emirates in the UK. And some of the conversation we're having about SoFi, which is located in Inglewood, which even though California is a deposit state, there isn't a tremendous amount of access in the Inglewood community. So we're looking at, you know, how not only can we increase access in that community, but use the anchor of SoFi to do it. And you know, we've run into this problem with, you know, people not necessarily having phones or technologies. And so is it, you can't really have a QR code. So is there, you know, can we use SoFi as that hub to collect that material? So these are just some of the things we're thinking about.
And it doesn't have to be an either or, it could be a both, that you need alternative paths for alternative populations.
Great. And is there maybe one piece of technology to improve recycling that you're really excited about, or one part of the system maybe that you can just share with the audience and kind of go into that maybe a bit deeper if you want?
I wish I had a good answer to that. I think to Eric's point of there's no one size fits all solution. On the technology side, I would love to say, oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this thing. I think it's going to change the world. I just, I feel like every day the conversation and the needs that we hear on the technology side are so diverse that there isn't really one thing that's going to move the needle. I think you need that full system and that more holistic approach.
I'd say bag drop. No.
As you should.
No, I'm really excited about communication platforms. As I said, it's really about getting the right message to the right person at the right time, and on the right channel. And I think we're at the beginning of setting up frameworks to allow the consumers that are recycling to configure the communications to their preference so that they're getting what they want, so that the program works for them and they engage more. So that could be telling you that you're doing better this year than last year. It could be telling you what's happening with the material that you've recycled. There's a ton of possibilities there. I think there's a lot of fun stuff too with gamification or team-based goals to get people to try to, within a community, to get to a certain number for a playground or something like that. But again, it all comes back to having the data and having an engagement platform with a set of consumers so that they can be aligned towards the goal.
Yeah, very cool. So then just kind of moving forward looking, what do you see as the future outlook for deposit return systems? And we mentioned policy at the early part of this conversation. So what role does policy need to play in that future outlook?
I'm going to start start this question with where I started the conversation today. We need more policy. And if I could, as my mother would say, twinkle my nose and make something happen, right, it would be looking ahead at a federal policy that creates that harmonization, that then we can really dive into, quite frankly, the infrastructure problem, rural and urban, and how do you figure that out if we can solve the federal policy piece.
Yeah, I'll sign up for that. Yeah, a national program would be fantastic. I don't know how to handicap it. That would solve a lot of problems with respect to cross border fraud, and bring a lot of efficiencies. And would bring a lot of efficiencies to the system.
Great. And of the 10 states that currently have deposit return systems, what can we learn from those states as maybe it goes to a national policy or moves to other states that currently don't have deposit return systems?
You're more deep into the policy on the state side.
What can we learn? Could you repeat?
Yeah, so just what can we learn from the states that have deposit return systems, whether good or bad, to bring to potential new states?
That they work. The recycling rate's higher. And consumers seem to like them. Citizens seem to like them. They're universally, generally beloved by the participants. They're important, and they're bringing the materials that we need, clean materials that can be recycled back into beverage containers. I think it's also important that they continue to need maintenance. I feel like in a lot of states they're underfunded, understaffed, and we're seeing some declining recycling rates as a result.
I think the modernization piece is hugely important. These policies are old, and the world looks very different today than it did when these policies were put into place. And I think there's a lot to learn, from states like California and states like New York, where the modernization is hugely important. And I even think, I'm from Honolulu originally, and I was back home a couple weeks ago, and the policy in Hawaii it's one of the newer ones, but there's also an incinerator on the island. So much of the material that it gets diverted to the incinerator. So it's not actually getting recycled out of this deposit system. Right, and that is a really weird example coming out of Hawaii, but I think it is a larger example of there are really weird examples like that in all 10 states. Where something has happened, they've done something to try and make this work in the context of that state. And so thinking about some of those learnings as we bring this to a national level, to, I don't want to say counteract the locality of it, but to make it a more harmonized system is crucial.
One other thought is that on the collection side, I think it's interesting to think about how DRS could support EPR going forward. It's a form of EPR. Is the infrastructure that's being put out in the field forward compatible with other sorts of recycling. So the redemption centers that are out there, or the other recycling modalities, can they work with other sorts of EPR materials? I think that's an important area of focus.
Great. I think you both bring up a lot of really great points, and I think we have maybe just a few minutes left if anyone has any questions for either Eric or Sarah. Happy. John has a microphone there.
And just is that on? Yeah. Okay. And just to thank you for that, it's very interesting. And just looking at the final comment you made, Eric, about EPR and deposit systems complementing each other, I think that's very relevant. And I think there was a discussion on this stage yesterday about Washington State, where they're putting in content requirements, but not putting in deposit systems, or not putting in any form of encouragement at the collection level. And I really don't think you can do one without the other. You know,
I agree.
There's no point in.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Great. We're all in agreement. Good way to start the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in on this morning. And yeah, I think our guests will be around today. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to catch one of us. Thank you again.